Hello, I'm Professor Ken Hardy at the Ivey Business School, and with me today is Doug Murphy, who graduated in 1985 from the HBA program. Doug and I met in a marketing planning class at that time, and I also knew his father. This is one of the few times I've interviewed someone. His father graduated the same year I did, in 1963, from this very same institution. So welcome, Doug. Thank you for coming today.
My pleasure.
You've had long experience with two major outfits. One was the Disney Corporation, which you joined early along here in Canada in the retail, and you grew it both globally, and you grew it fast in Japan. And then you have joined, after about a decade with Disney, you joined Corus Entertainment, and you've grown that business as well. Tell me a couple of the highlights of those two separate decades.
Happily. I think the Disney decade, I would say a couple things I learned, but one of the highlights was that I thrived in a values-driven organization. So Disney has a very strong culture of creativity, innovation, family, and pride in the brand and being part of the company. People work very hard to get a job at Disney. There are people there that have worked for 50, 60 years in the company. So that environment was one that I learned that I could thrive in just because it was a fit with what made me tick. In terms of specific stories of Disney, my personal highlight was my time spent in Japan. Growing the Disney stores there from 22 to 85 stores. We became the largest wholly owned specialty retailer in Japan at that time. And I was a young person of 33 managing a business with all Japanese people, as you would figure, and had to basically change out the entire management team, bring in bilingual, bicultural people, meaning Japanese that were married to a French guy, or British guys married to a French woman, people that understood the culture intimately and had some degree of knowledge of the language. And that was a wholesale management team change, and then watched an organization grow and thrive. So that was exciting for me. Lots of great things about Disney. I guess the other thing I would just say briefly is I learned to be a creative risk taker in how I think about the business, to always don't be afraid of making enough to fail. You gotta roll the dice. And lastly, I guess a little simple concept, which has served me well, is balancing people and tasks. So the notion of don't be so task focused, spend more time almost on the relationships.
Was that enhanced by being in another culture?
Yeah, partly it was because you had to be a student of that culture. So you had to genuinely want to be in a relationship with those people, you know what I mean? So, because that's the only way that they'd come forward to you, is if you were authentic with them. And that's a great thing to bring into back here in the Western world, is the notion of authenticity as a leader, and being available and being genuine and having integrity, and even I talked earlier in your class, Ken, the notion of sometimes the most powerful thing a leader can do is to admit failure to his team. It's like, because we're all human beings and we learn from that, right? So,
you also mentioned in the class, I think it was called Nimawashi.
Nimawashi. Do I give a little quick start? So Nimawashi was again from Japan. It means, in Japanese, it means preparing the roots. And the Japanese have this amazing thing they do where they take a 200-year-old tree, and they'll, over a period of a year, they'll dig underneath the tree, and they'll prune the smaller roots and focus on the bigger roots as they slowly dig it out. And they move these massive trees hundreds of miles and replant them. And the analogy is that when you're going to have a big meeting with somebody, or a big group of people, do the Nimawashi first. What are the 3 or 4 big decision makers in that meeting of 15 or 20 that you should have the pre-meeting with? Because the meeting before the meeting is the most important meeting. So that's the notion of Nimawashi.
And you think it would work equally well here?
It works all the time here. I do it all the time. Every time I got a big meeting, I will preview the concept and the content with the key decision makers, so I know I've got their support. Then I'll go in with them in the room anyways and make my presentation.
You've had enormous success. You've not only grown these two businesses and all the sub-variations that you worked in within them very quickly, but you've also done it globally. What's the pressure that you felt for fast growth?
Well, it's unceasing, I'm afraid. I think that's largely driven by the capital markets. I think if any of these businesses were privately held, I think you probably have growth pressure, but maybe not as consistent. But it's just a fact of life that you need to have earnings growth and revenue growth, and you get that by building new businesses, superior execution of sales ideas, and managing your costs. And you have to have one eye on the top line and one eye on the expense line, really, because sometimes you can't control what happens on the sales side.
You've spent a lot of your career outside Canada. You were repatriated a few years ago. But what's the drive for globalization?
Me personally, or in the business world?
I would say in the business.
Well, I think it's, from my vantage point, it's Canada is still a small market. So I think that back to the notion of growth, if you want to get growth, you can work real hard to grow inside of Canada and likely be successful at that. But there's a huge, big pond out there outside of Canada, and to the extent to which your product or service is saleable internationally, it's certainly worth a look, I would say. And I think there's no real borders anymore.
A lot of authors and writers in leadership distinguish between leadership as leading change versus managing, which is kind of looking after the details and the execution. What's your take on that?
My personal view is that you're always changing. So leadership is managing change. It's one and the same. It's synonymous with being a good leader is always asking your team to change how they do things. We just did a big reorganization of the TV group of Corus a year and a half ago, and we're not done. And it's not about cost. It's just about fine-tuning the structural ideas. And we started with a white piece of paper. We designed jobs first, not people. And then we looked at the talented people we had, and we put them in the jobs. And in many cases, gave people bigger jobs or responsibility, larger remits. But it's an ongoing process of change.
What's your leadership style?
I am approachable, high energy, creative in terms of problem solving, willing to change on a dime. If someone's got a better idea, I have no pride of ownership of ideas. I encourage constructive dissent amongst our team. I hold people accountable. I don't micromanage. Let them do their job. Pay them accordingly. Try to hire the best people. Try to promote the best people. Try to manage weak performers out of the business pretty diligently. It's a privilege to have a job, I think. Certainly for Corus or Disney, those are great companies. You have to earn your right to stay.
You've enjoyed enormous success in 2 different venues, 2 different businesses in a different country. How do you stay grounded? This is fairly glamorous. How do you stay grounded?
Well, glamorous to some. You know how I stay grounded is I go home to my 3 and 5-year-old daughters and my lovely wife. Yeah. And that's the most important thing. It's sort of like, it's amazing. I got married later on in life, but maybe I may have had a different view to glamour if I had this job 15 years ago. But I don't really find the glamour that glamorous. Toronto International Film Festival, great, sort of fun, but it doesn't really motivate me. I like a good time as much as the next guy, but I don't get caught up in the kind of the star-struck stuff. It's all out there, and I could probably do a lot more of that if I wanted to, but it doesn't motivate me. I'm much more motivated by having a personal life that fulfills me, a physical fitness regimen, eating well, some degree of spirituality, and then a great career. All those things to me all fit together.